Be here. I know everybody is feeling time pressured in very odd ways right now. I myself wake up in the morning usually with a very lengthy agenda, and somewhere in the middle of the day, I kind of fizzle out. And I think that's only one of the many situations that we're seeing as a result of having to deal with what is really the stressor of our time, I think is fair to say. Um, So I'm just here to offer a little information and to encourage some discussion amongst people. I was listening to a therapist the other night, being interviewed about it, and one of the things she talked about that really resonated with me was the idea that we have to name the things that are stressing us. And I think that that is particularly challenging right now because there are so many unknowns. We don't know what spaces are safe. We don't know how long this is going to go on. We don't know what tomorrow is going to be like, much less next week or next month or 6 months from now. And I think that's one of the challenges of coping with this crisis is being able to say what really bothers us when we're so uncertain about everything. It's very challenging. At least it is for me. So I tried to find the most calming, soothing background picture I could find for you. And this is actually the bay out by the university. If you can see, here's the Performing Arts Center right under self-care there. You can see it. Um, so this is what the university looks like when you're out in the bay looking at it. So today I want to talk a little bit about recognizing and naming stressors, self-care, student engagement. Everything we're going through, our students are going through more. And, they are less than us in many ways to deal with these stressors because, most of us in our adult lives have gone through periods of uncertainty and managed it. But, oftentimes our students are very young and they haven't hit a lot of the major life stressors yet. So this is going to be very, very unique for them. And I am not wed to my agenda. So if at any point you want to stop and interject or discuss, that's absolutely fine with me. In fact, I would prefer that. So, but a few of the things I thought about when I was preparing this presentation was the idea that this is truly a unique situation for us. And it's a crisis. And to me, naming it as a crisis is part of recognizing its significance. And, all crisis means is that old ways of coping with things don't work anymore. I mean, that's the definition of a crisis is when you try to manage something in the ways that you always have before, it doesn't work. And so crises force us into new ways of handling unique stressors. And in that sense, they're an incredible opportunity for growth. And, a lot of really important life skills are built out of managing crises, although this crisis is a sustained crisis. And this idea that every day we're going to be able to come up with something to manage our anxiety or our feelings is sort of an example of an old coping mechanism that doesn't work. And so I think understanding that this is chronic, it's ongoing, it's going to take some time, maybe take some of the pressure off the idea that we should be managing perfectly all the time. Some of the things that I think about that make this really unique is that this is a global crisis. A lot of times in our life, when we have a crisis, we turn to people who are not having a crisis, right? Because they can help us. They have reserves and resources that we don't have. And everybody on the planet is going through this. So it's global. It's also individual because it's happening to each one of us as an individual. It impacts every environment, family environment, work environment. Freud said that the secret of mental health was, being effective in love and work. And, this affects everything. we're with our families or not with our families in ways that we've probably never been before. And, a lot of family dynamics come up in those situations because of the intensity of the contact that we have. And the same is true with our friendships. And I'm pretty sure my dog feels that way too. I think he'd like me to go back to work because I am not playing with him all day long when I'm here. So the other thing that I think is unique is we don't know when recovery will begin. I listen to Andrew Cuomo's press conferences every day, and it's sort of sad when he says that a good day is when less than 500 people have died. I mean, and that's just an extraordinary way to measure improvement. And so I think also underneath all of this is that there's a lot of grief. People that we know have lost their lives. My 101-year-old mother is quarantined to her room in an assisted living facility and has about 15 minutes of human contact a day. And, all of these things are losses that we have to go through to protect ourselves and make ourselves safe. And I think it produces extraordinary senses of grief that sneak up on us at little times, you know. So again, I think that naming stressors is important. I don't know if you can see Freud in the corner of your screen, but he's wearing a Wisconsin cheesehead stress squeezy thing. um, so social distancing, even though it helps us, is a stressor. It feels weird to be 6 feet away from somebody that you've known for a long time and not be able to touch them or have this little sense of fear that, maybe your contact will create a problem for you. So even though it's something we need to do, it's stressful. It's stressful to self-quarantine. Some of us are in intense family dynamics. Some of us are lonely because we feel isolated and we're on our own. There's clearly an absence of normal routine, and I'm pretty sure that this impacts on everybody. Um, I myself try to make sure I get up every morning and shower and change my clothes, but I wouldn't have to. Um, and so I do that just because I think these small uh, attempts at routine are a way to kind of keep the time from flowing. I don't know, have any of y'all experienced this sense that time just seems to be flowing together? Day and night, the days of the week are kind of all the same and flow into the weekend. Has anybody felt that? I see. Thank you for nodding, Kelly. So, thank you, Meredith. Good. Yeah, it's astonishing to me, it's like being on this sort of endless, it's not a vacation for sure, but everything sort of is flowing together. And I think we feel time pressures. I can't see everything that you're saying, Meredith, because of how my screen's set up. But
Sorry, I was trying not to interrupt so that you could kind of filter it in when you wanted, but I made it harder than I intended. I was just going to say this is something my students have expressed to me as well. When we do chat, they've been very forward about how this is really impactful for them, and I just thought that was interesting because you brought it up specifically, and that's something specifically that they told me when I check in with them.
yeah, I had a student email me last week and she's like, I'm sorry I missed the exam, but I pretty much stay in bed all day and I forgot what time it was. And I said, okay, I'm going to reset that for you, and I think it's important to remember, as stressful as this is for us with our various responsibilities, again, it's super stressful for students. And we are powerful role models of, uh, I hate to use the word normality because nothing feels normal, but, I've been very upfront with my students of saying, yeah, this is, we're all kind of struggling, but we will get through it. And, there's X amount of time left in the semester, so just keep on going. And I've been way more in contact with them in my classes than I would normally because I think they appreciate that. And that's a way of kind of keeping time a little more structured.
I've also been sending out a lot more reminders because of that time flow. So
Yes.
like it's Wednesday, Friday is 2 days away. Don't forget, deadline Friday.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that, that's helpful to people. And, I'm sure there are students who say, well, yeah, of course I know it's Friday. But I think that those are little things, but it's really probably these small attempts at structure and normality that are most helpful in the long run and some big, gigantic, massive, super coping um, mechanism. And of course, there's a enormous loss of resources going on, both emotional and financial. We're very fortunate at the university that we've been able to keep working remotely, but that's not true for everybody, and it's certainly not true for a lot of our students. A lot of them work in service industries where, the restaurants are closed, or they're taking jobs that feel risky. Like a lot of my students have communicated that they've gone to work at HEB because it's one of the few people that's employing them right now, and it's giving them bonus pay, but that it feels risky to them. So we have demands being made on us all over, and even if we may not personally be affected by something, it's certainly happening to all the people around us. I know many people who have lost jobs or are concerned about whether or not they're going to have jobs in a few weeks. And given what happened in the oil industry yesterday, our local communities are going to be even more impacted. Um, I also think it's very easy when we're in an extreme stress situation. Think about a hurricane. A hurricane, you're usually prepping for a week. It lasts about 3 days, and then the bad part goes on for a while unless you're directly hit. Well, this has been going on quite a while now, and it's easy to resort to the quick fix, feel good coping mechanisms. Eating, drinking, all the other feel good strategies. Um, and, guilty. I'm guilty. I don't know how many of you are guilty, but I'm guilty. And, I don't think that you should stress too much about that because those are sort of natural protective strategies. And as long as you mix the quick fix in with, uh, some consideration of long-term impact, I think you'll be fine. Um, and of course, there is survivor guilt. Some of us feel less impacted than others, and we realize we can't really help people who might need it because of the restrictions on our own lives. So it's easy to feel like you're not doing enough, I think. Lastly, I want to point out, and this is something I talked about with Healing After Harvey, is that when we are under sustained stress, it typically reawakes old traumas and stressors. It makes us think about things that maybe we haven't thought about in a long time because those feelings of fear and inadequacy and other kinds of things are quick to rise to the surface. So, again, this goes back to naming the stressor. Instead of kind of beating yourself up because you're feeling bad, because you're thinking about these things from the past, if you say, well, hey, this is what happens when people experience trauma or stress. They think about other traumas and stressors. And sometimes just naming it brings a little bit of psychological relief. So I think that that's really important for people. And of course, recognize your own needs. Well, that's hard. I know that there are a lot of parents like Isla all of a sudden at home with multiple kids and a husband, and people are competing for computer space, and everybody's needs feel like they're the most important, and so on and so forth. And, a lot of times as faculty and staff, we're asked to solve all kinds of multiple problems on a daily basis. And so we kind of push our own needs aside in order to address those of the students. And, sometimes that's okay, but I think, again, because we have to acknowledge the sort of sustained nature of the stressor, we know, for instance, that we'll be online at least through summer one, that making sure that if you're really tired or feeling very draggy, that you take a break. Maybe you need to take multiple small breaks during the day rather than sitting down and trying to force yourself through feelings of fatigue. And I think, everybody does that a little bit differently. But what I've found, it's been very valuable for me to get up, number one, because my chair at home is not nearly as cozy as my office chair is. And all of a sudden it feels very hard. And of course, we have a culture that values self-reliance, but that's not always adaptive in terms of long-term stressors. I've asked people to do things for me that I wouldn't normally ask, and I've done things for people who have asked them of me. And I think that these small acts are ways of staying connected with people and help us replenish our sense of compassion for each other, no matter if we're on the receiving end or the giving end. So I think trying to work those in as best as we are able to is really important. And everybody does it in different ways. Like Meredith and Wendy have done an outstanding job of posting dance videos on Blackboard for us so that we can all
Let's be clear here. This was no feat in wonderful dance moves. It was just a funny joke.
But it worked. It worked. It was a stress reliever.
Well, yay. I'm glad its intended purpose was met with funny gazes and maybe some guffaws, a little stressor, if you will. We couldn't think of anything else we could do. So I think dealing with that kind of like moment of inability, we thought, well, we can at least make people laugh.
Well, and that's a great example of a new coping mechanism arising out of a crisis, right? It comes across in funny kinds of ways. And a big part of healing is sometimes just, again, expressing what these concerns are. We don't have to fix them all the time, but we have to acknowledge them. And I think, if you look at the research literature on post-traumatic stress disorder, the people who are stoic and pretend that they don't have any problems and don't express fear and anxiety are actually the people who a lot of times have worse outcomes. So, acknowledging when a particular day feels bad or we feel overwhelmed or we're exhausted, I think is really important. Because not acknowledging it, these feelings will rise to the surface one way or the other, and they can do it in an adaptive way through acknowledging them and naming them, or they can do it in a maladaptive way, which would be irritability, inappropriate coping mechanisms, things like that. So one of the things, because of my background as a neuropsychologist, that I always like to talk about with stress is the physiology of stress, because I think it's really underappreciated. We sort of think of our brain as this thing that acts independent of the body, and it doesn't. The brain and body are intimately connected, which is why, stress is related to all the major causes of disease and death that we know of. And when we're in a crisis or stressed, it pushes us into action. And it does it by ramping up our sympathetic nervous system. That's why it's called the sympathetic nervous system, because it's in sympathy with our desire to manage. And, tens of thousands of years ago, that probably meant running away from a saber-toothed tiger. But today, it means something really different. But it's still physiological. When cortisol is released in response to stress, it makes our heart beat faster. It makes blood rush to our big muscles. It makes our mouth dry and our eyes dilate, and it suppresses urination. And it does all these kinds of things that prepare you for fight or flight. Now, under normal circumstances, let's say you were driving somewhere. Boy, that's a concept, isn't it? Driving somewhere. And you almost got in a car accident. Well, your sympathetic nervous system would ramp up in that moment. But as soon as the danger had passed, your parasympathetic nervous system would come into play and cause your heart rate to go down. And it would reverse all those mechanisms of anxiety and stress. Well, when you're under sustained stress, that doesn't happen. And that's why ultimately it impacts on the bodies in ways that are toxic. So anything that you can do to kind of decrease some of that physical stress that results from these cortisol changes is really important. But some of the ways that it affects people is forgetfulness and difficulty making decisions. I've coined my new phrase, which is COVID-19 dementia, like walking away from the stove with a burner under a pot, or, forgetting why you had a conversation with somebody about something. And I think that those are normal parts of sustained stress. And again, you're going
Totally
to have,
stealing that. Sorry, I just had to interrupt because I'm over here just guffawing and laughing. That's great.
yeah, well, it's true. And again, if your heart rate is up and you're sweaty and you're feeling anxious, take a 5-minute walk. Exercise, light exercise is actually one of the easiest ways that we can clear uh, the impact of these stress hormones out of our body. Because if we don't, it does impair immune function. Um, having these hormones circulating in our body cause changes in appetite and sleep. They can make us tired. I don't know if anybody's having sleep disturbances in the night, but that's real common. And, some nights I'll sleep just fine. Other nights I'll wake up in the middle of the night. And I think that that's pretty normal. And it goes along with this sort of fluid time that we're experiencing. And of course, long term, these can cause mood symptoms like depression and anxiety. And if you have psychological issues to begin with, they're going to be exacerbated by this. So the longer the stressor continues, the longer the physical response and the longer the recovery time. So anything you can do, little things like a crazy dance party on Facebook or just walking around the block are really important. Um, so what kinds of things are less effective? Well, we all know this, but it doesn't hurt to mention it. Drug and alcohol use, including legal drugs such as caffeine. There is such a thing as being too caffeinated, just saying. And remember, the more caffeine you drink, the less effective it is. Overeating or sleeping too much, withdrawing. I don't know how everybody else is feeling, but at the end of the day, when I have more time to kind of reach out to people, I'm kind of thinking, I don't know if I have the energy kind of type thing. And so I try to give myself little reminders to do that. Of course, denial is something that we're certainly seeing not just amongst us, but all over the country as the media looks at the crisis we're going through. And I think it's also just easy to ignore our needs. We can throw ourselves into work, we can throw ourselves into activities with our kids, we can try to do things that are distracting. And we can become overengaged in conflict. When people are scared, they get mad. And when people are mad, they argue and they are irritable and they're less willing to be flexible. And sometimes in these relating to people distancing in this distant fashion is really hard to manage that, I think, because you're a three-dimensional person relating to two-dimensional people that are real people, but it just doesn't feel the same as if you're in a room with somebody, right? So of course, positive self-care, and again, I know that we all know these things, but it doesn't hurt to remind ourselves. Try to establish a normal routine if you can. Like I've been really trying to make sure that I take some portion of the weekend and not work, even if it means just resting and relaxing. Keep active if you can, both mentally and physically. And again, exercise is one of the best ways to handle mild stress. It'll clear cortisol out of your body. Doing something that is different than your work routine is important. Like I've been baking. And if you live close to me, you have been the recipient of my baked goods, because if I kept them all in the house and ate them, it would move from positive self-care into negative self-care. But we all have things that we like to do that take us out of the kind of hoi polloi of daily life and put us in the moment. And those things can provide real mental relaxation for us. It could be cooking, it could be baking, it could be working on your car, it could be writing, it could, whatever it is, it could be listening to music. We all need to take a little extra time for that. And of course, there's lots of different resources out there. But sometimes when I read about the resources and I read the articles about how to manage my stress, I feel stressed by that. Because it's like, I must not be doing something correct if I'm feeling stressed by wanting to be de-stressed. So try to be practical about your problem solving. Instead of saying, I'm going to exercise every day this week, say, I want to add exercise into my routine 1 or 2 times this week. I think it's human nature to want to compensate for feelings of stress by making lists and thinking about what you're going to do, and again, that can add stress too. And again, helping others is important. That kind of altruism is a very powerful source of positive feelings. And I'm seeing it in the discussion boards with my students in my class every week. Somebody will be writing in and they'll be very topic focused, and a student will say, yeah, I just can't get out of bed, or my work is really stressing me out, or I'm worried about my mom because she's an ICU nurse. And the other students will immediately chime in the group and say, hey, if you need something, call me, or I can help you. And I haven't had to encourage that at all. It's just a natural tendency of people, I think, to want to do that. So, support that where you can, both in yourselves and others. If you feel overwhelmed, seek help. The state of Texas, believe it or not, has a statewide mental health line that you can call and talk to somebody on if you want to maintain your privacy. And most of us have friends or other people in our family we can talk to, but sometimes it helps to have a stranger to share these things with, because we don't feel as self-conscious or shamed by feelings that we're uncomfortable with. And I think, one of the things that I really try to do is avoid judgment. I try to remind myself every day that all the people I'm dealing with are going through the same thing as I am, and that we're all suffering from irritability and impatient and unrealistic demands. And, we want certainty about the future that nobody can really give us right now. And we're all kind of in it together. And so that helps me to kind of keep my perspective on the process. So this is my favorite cartoon I've come up with so far. So everybody take a deep breath. And here's the brain talking to the heart. And the heart says, hey, heart, hey, what do you say we do one productive thing today? Just one. Anybody have this conversation with themselves since all this has started? And look at the poor heart. He's like, he says, brain, we've talked about that. We both have needs, but when you are being unreasonable, and then the brain says, well, but you always feel better when you get things done. Shh, just let me do whatever I want. Just let me do it. I'm pretty sure that most of us have had this conversation more than once. Would that be correct? Yeah. And the brain and the heart both have a point. And some days the heart is going to win, and some days the brain is going to win. And I think that's okay. So before we talk about students, I'm wondering if people are willing to talk a little bit about some of the times that they may or may not have coped or managed well in response to the pandemic. Does anyone just leap right in and speak? I don't know who all's out there because I can only see 4 of you on my screen.
We have been trying, we started kind of just a sort of conscious eating program. So being super aware of like our body, really taking time to think about like, am I full? Am I eating because I'm stressed? We started that really early in this process and actually lost a little weight over time. But it's not about really weight loss, but it sort of helps right now because it's really, I'm one of those, I'm definitely a nervous eater. I'm not one of those people that stresses and gets skinny. So for me, it was super helpful because I'm like, just check in. What do I really need right now? Can I sub something else? Can we do a walk? Can we have, like a water or something else? I mean, just something so that's helpful. But I mean, that's one positive thing. I do like alcohol, so there's that, but
That helped me too because it gave me something to focus on, which I found really helpful, like in my personal life versus work. And then just finding outlets, whether it be a funny dance party or uh, I don't know how many of you follow Wendy on Facebook, posting a post every day about what we're dealing with and just having the ability to share that, even if no one reads it, I think has been really helpful. And I'll read it out loud on the couch and then we'll laugh and reminding ourselves to have a little levity even on the hard days.
One thing that I've done that is not good is that I feel myself going into these like states of hypervigilance and then I just then it's really I exhaust myself, and then on the flip side is just being super exhausted and run down and feeling terrible. So I have been trying to cope doing all the good stuff too, but it's just like when you get that physiological response for the hypervigilance, it just gets overwhelming sometimes. So
It's overwhelming, and that's the cortisol talking. And, I was thinking about it the other day and I thought, I don't even know how our bodies are keeping up with making it because this is so sustained.
I feel that too. One of the things that I've been doing with, you were talking about sleep patterns, is I've definitely, I like won't sleep one night and then the next day I'll sleep like 10 hours because I'm exhausted, which is probably not the best thing, but I think it's related to what you said.
I've been trying to find a healthy balance of the social media that I consume. On one hand, I really love feeling in touch with my friends on Facebook and seeing the different travel pictures or watching the dance offs or anything that is entertaining. But then as you're scrolling through, you're also exposed to the death counts and the bad news and the just the very undesirable news. And so I have found myself physically leaving all of my electronics in one room and then going to another place in the house or going outside and just reading a hardcover book just to give myself an hour or two away from the outside world.
I think that's a really great idea, Kelly, because part of the overwhelmingness of this is the media response to it, and I think about other times in my life that have been very stressful, like, growing up during the Vietnam War, and you had one news outlet that communicated that to you in one way, and you didn't have the stress of trying to manage all this information. And I think breaking the electronic routine is good. I've been watching a lot of television. I guess Netflix stock is way up because everybody's watching a lot of TV. But, I find my mind drifting even when I do relaxing things like, I'll have to go back and restart a show because I can't sort of really, I didn't really catch what was happening. Or even when I'm reading or, the hypervigilance, sometimes the most innocuous news story will make me burst into tears. Early on, in the COVID crisis, there was a major earthquake in Zagreb where I spent a year on my Fulbright, and the beautiful 700-year-old apartment I lived in was destroyed. And, I was corresponding with people in Zagreb about it, and here they were under quarantine out in the streets with their homes destroyed. And, it was an incredibly sad image for me. And I think that there's a lot of that right now. And I think taking a break from it is a good idea. It doesn't mean that it's out of your mind, but I don't think we can stay focused on it all the time and be healthy either, especially given all the immediate concerns we have.
Yeah, I've limit my online news information to very briefly. I mean, I'm checking uh, what is it? Oh my gosh, the world where COVID is and everything like that, because I'm checking every day for kids where they're living and stuff. But that helps when I do that, when I limit it. I've been with Susan and I've been walking usually once a day, sometimes twice a day. That's helped out. But we haven't really it's changed to stay there at the same time and all. And things are going well, but it's even with the students. But I have sometimes has been difficult, but then it's picked up again and all for me. But I'm busy as anything. I've got like a conference, virtual conference this weekend, so I've got to deal with that. But things are going well, really.
Well, that's great. And I think one of the things that you're talking about that's important, Tom, is even though we're in the middle of all this, we have to look to the future in some ways, and that's part of sustaining some kind of routine of sorts. Um, and being future oriented is a positive kind of thing. So I think that that's really helpful.
I was thinking too, because you mentioned that it's global, and in a sense that's a negative, but in an odd sense it's kind of positive. Because I was remembering after Harvey, everybody's paying attention to what's happening in those locations where some sort of disaster is, and then like a day goes by and everybody's done with it, and we're sitting here in this disaster zone, going, there's people with no houses, we don't have clothes, we're trying to get students that way, we don't have power in our homes and things like that. And other people were like, well, what are you talking about? I was getting hit up for like conference funding or something. I'm like, leave me alone, I'm busy in this disaster. And now that's not the case. Like, I can at least share this feeling with colleagues in other universities all over the country, like, and some of them to varying degrees or slightly different experiences depending on where they are and what they have going on. But I can talk to people, and it's a very common feeling, and that's kind of a relief too.
Yeah.
I think the best thing that I've done is just call old friends. I got out my handwritten analog phone book and said, I wonder which ones of these numbers are still good. And I started calling people's old landlines. And I've been trying to talk with an old friend every day. And it's at least been fun. It's been great to catch up with people. And I suspect, well, I don't suspect, they tell me it's great to hear from me. And it's nice to feel like you've done something helpful to somebody else. And that really is helpful. I'd love to get a phone call from somebody I haven't talked to in a long time. What a great thing. That's been really good. The other thing, I've been printing COVID supplies. It seems really sort of in some ways petty to print up 30, masks for somebody, but maybe it really will do somebody some good. And anything you can do that's helpful for somebody else is gonna feel good right now.
Yeah, I think that those are great ideas too, Louis. I've been both I've made a point of calling all my single friends to make sure they're okay. And I've gotten a lot of phone calls from friends that I haven't talked to in a long time, because all of a sudden everybody has a lot of time on their hands, except they don't. So those are all really great ideas, you guys, and I actually like these WebEx meetings, not so much for the content, but because I like to see everybody and talk to them, because it's a point of connection in a world that feels very disconnected in so many different kinds of ways. So I just want to mention students some, because I think it's important for us to remember that they do not necessarily bring the same skills to the table that we do. They're young. College is already acknowledged as being one of the stressful adult transitions people can make. That's why we have counseling centers with people like Teresa and the other therapists that are there, because we know that it's a stressful time for people. And I think about these kids that are getting ready to graduate and, not being able to go to graduation. When in the 70s, that was like a sign of protest to not go to graduation, but we weren't denied the option of it. Or, what kind of world are they moving into in terms of employment? Um, and in many instances, their self-care strategies are not super well developed. And even if they may not be personally experiencing it, somebody in their family might be. I think about all our nursing students and how, or our practicum students, and how they haven't been able to finish their placements because of the restrictions. And I think a lot of times students, because they're young, have a hard time recognizing their own emotional distress, particularly when they're cut off from their friends who are their major source of support. So we are powerful role models to them about coping effectively. And sometimes it takes that extra bit of push when we're having a difficult day to deal with students in a very calm and rational kind of way. But I think that is more important than content delivery at this point. And as we get to this end part of the semester that's coming up, we're going to see more students reaching out because they're stressed or they haven't done something or they've forgotten it. And I think handling it in a calm and thoughtful way is one of the very, very best things that we can do for them at this point. Oops. My screen has taken over. Okay. So how do we know when students are distressed? Well, I think it's pretty obvious. Their work quality goes down, they procrastinate, they don't attend. I'm happy to say that I've had very good attendance on my Blackboard course, so that's good. They ask for special consideration, they can be disruptive, they're fatigued, they communicate in their writings. I've seen that very clearly from my students in terms of their communications in our weekly discussions about the issues they're having. Other kinds of things we can see, well, we're not going to actually be seeing our students much, although Meredith or the people who are doing regular WebEx things might. They're depressed, they're anxious, they cry, irritable, angry, hyperactive, weight change, indecisive, lethargic, poor hygiene and dress, speech and thoughts that are hard to follow, other stranger and you. This could be describing us, right? I had to laugh yesterday morning. I walk my dog early in the morning and I'm walking down the street and there's a guy walking up and down the sidewalk in his boxer shorts and his dog is off leash. So of course the dog immediately runs to my dog and he comes and picks up the dog and he's drinking coffee and he just walks back to his house. And I thought, oh my God, we're all going feral. We're not even wearing clothes outside the house now.
I don't know if anybody saw the article. It was, I want to say it was Scotland or I can't even remember. It might have been in the US, but the police department had to issue a statement saying, please remember to wear clothes while checking the mail.
Well, that could happen, and I think that, the guy was mildly embarrassed because he obviously didn't expect anybody to be walking down the street that early in the morning, but hey. So I think if we reach out to our students, that's important. We can contact them on Starfish or we can go through iCare if we really think that there's a serious problem. And I think it helps to be specific. You missed the assignment, you're not doing this, you haven't checked in. And I think students appreciate that. It's hard to ask for help. And when someone says, hey, I see that you're not here and I want to help you, they appreciate that. They like the idea that there are adults out there looking out for them and are saying, hey, it's okay to feel this way. And of course, University Counseling Center is still working and can act as a resource for our students. So again, provide information about campus resources, let students know they have options, help them identify and gauge their own resources. And, you may not be able to solve their problem. They may have, really serious things happening in their lives that you can't address, but you can kind of direct them to where they need to go. These are some of the numbers for the University Counseling Center, iCare. and the University Police. Hopefully we won't have to call them about anything. So that ends the formal part of the presentation. I actually liked us chatting the most. So questions, comments, concerns, and here you see Freud in front of a Mellaril cup. And I don't know how many of you know what Mellaril is, but it was one of the first antipsychotic medications to be used. And I teach a class on drugs, so I've been collecting drug mugs for like 40 years, and this is my first drug mug. It's from the 70s with this smiley, happy face on it. So we're all in this together, and it's important to be safe and to be well.